Hi guys, Morgan Robinson here with the Healing Broken Trust podcast, where we lay the foundation for healing after infidelity. Thank you so much for investing in yourself and your relationship by joining us here. This podcast has been downloaded now over 2 million times, and we're always looking for ways to help you guys take your healing journey to the next level. Brad has taken what he's learned as a marriage and family therapist after working with over 5,800 couples one-on-one and has put it into a workshop setting. Why a workshop, you ask? Because it allows us to deliver personal help to you specifically. It gives you the opportunity to hear from other couples who have made it through the struggle and offers a private community of like-minded people trying to heal broken trust and change their family's future for the better. We extend the support far beyond the 3-day workshop and meet with you weekly to make sure you're getting everything you need. Remember the masterclass? We include that too. And don't worry, it's offered virtually as well for those of you who live anywhere in the world. Visit healingbrokentrust.com to learn more. That's healingbrokentrust.com.
You're listening to Healing Broken Trust podcast. I have a special guest with me today, my usual sidekick, who's not really a guest, but you've been gone for a while. Yeah. So where have you been, Morgan?
Well, we've had 3 lovely children, and so I've been spending a lot of time with them and also working behind the scenes on these awesome workshops that you've been leading. I feel like have gone really, really well. People have really loved them. So yeah, that's really where I've been focusing a lot of my energy. We have 3 very small kids. We lost your parents and my parents, and so we just don't have anyone to watch our kids, it seems.
Yeah.
So that's where I've been. Yeah,
your parents moved to Florida.
That's right. Yeah, which they're living it up by the beach, I guess, somewhere over there in Florida.
Yeah, they left Oklahoma and said, "Oh, here, Florida, here we come."
Yep.
And my mom had cancer. She passed on.
Yeah.
And then 16 days later, my stepdad died from a heart attack.
Yeah.
They were married 27 years and really a great couple.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people can relate to the changing in the family dynamic, especially through COVID.
Yeah.
Like everything is up in flux. We're all like moving and changing our professions and all of that. So we haven't been excluded from that phenomenon. We're in that flux state. So
the great resignation, people are changing careers.
Yeah.
A lot of changes happening for people.
Absolutely.
We know people personally who've been impacted by COVID. We've lost family members.
Yeah, it's all over. I know we've all really experienced the craziness of COVID. So, but without further ado, I know we've got some really important things to talk about today that I know Brad is really excited about. It's one of the most important things that you will learn in this entire podcast. So what do you want to talk about with the Healing Broken Trust Triangle?
Yeah, we're going to talk about the Healing Broken Trust Triangle. And I cannot emphasize enough how important this is. I really can't. I know that sounds like, an exaggeration, but it's really not. This is, if you are stuck in healing, you're probably going to realize today why you're stuck and what you need to do about it. This is, I can't, again, emphasize enough how important this is. It's like going to the Grand Canyon and seeing the beauty of it. You just can't put it into words.
Right.
It's hard. You can't emphasize how beautiful that is. The same is true with what we're going to talk about, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And affairs are
They're
hard.
Painful.
They're painful. People who are betrayed feel immense betrayal, immense pain, incredible depression. Part of you dies inside. Part of you quits feeling like you can trust others, not just your spouse, but other people. Sometimes you feel crazy because I still love my spouse who broke my trust. I quit trusting them right away, but I don't quit loving them right away. And so I feel crazy. I feel kind of, and you're normally the person I would go to who broke my trust for any sort of, comfort or relief during normal storms. But this storm is one that you created. And then the one who broke trust, the one who, we've called the betrayer in the past, to that person who breaks trust, they feel shame. They feel sorrow. They feel sometimes, it's a tricky situation because sometimes, they have their own set of relationship issues before they act out.
Yeah.
And, it's the different reasons why people stray, but they feel sometimes unseen in the process. Sometimes they feel, not really heard, or
Kind of lost.
Yeah, they feel lost and they feel shame, and so it's tricky. And so this healing broken trust triangle is very important. It's a part of the roadmap, but it's something that we have to work on each side of the triangle if we're going to heal. And the first part of this triangle is the most obvious part, and that is the affair repair portion of the healing process. And part of that affair repair is everything that we've talked about on the podcast. It's things like cutting off the affair. It's instituting healthy boundaries. It's having total honesty and transparency from the one who was unfaithful. It's getting those basic questions answered about the events that broke trust. It's addressing negative cycles of communication. It's restoring a sense of feeling chosen for each partner.
Yeah, the chosen piece. So
Both
important.
people need to feel chosen. And then you could say this whole process of healing and really working through the triangle is about restoring a sense of feeling chosen for each partner. Now, we maybe don't lead with the one who is unfaithful, so we typically start on the affair repair portion of the triangle. There's 3 sides to this. There's the affair repair portion, there's the general marriage issues that we have to address, and then there's the trauma that we have to address that's a result of betrayal.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's 2 different systems that we're dealing with. We're dealing with the trauma system, which is completely different than, it's not really completely different, but the broken trust creates trauma and it creates affair repair issues, all that kind of thing. But you have to deal with both things.
Right.
Us is one system, and that's broken into affair repair and marriage issues. And then me, that's the trauma system. We have to address that. And what people tend to do, because it's obvious, is they focus on either their marriage. Let's not talk about the affair. Let's just jump into working on the marriage. And we've talked about that before in the podcast, where people will just avoid any talks about the affair and what happened, and maybe start having sex right away, maybe
trying to move on, doing things to move on without just kind of prematurely.
Yeah. So they don't address the affair. They don't really understand, why it happened.
Yeah.
And they don't, take necessary steps to prevent it from happening again.
But it's a natural desire people have.
Yeah.
I just want to stop feeling this way.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it's totally understandable. I get it. I can understand it. And then, the affair repair part of the work is, like you said, restoring a sense of feeling chosen for each partner. Part of that is the betrayer becoming a healer. There's different things in there. The 7 stages of affair recovery that we've talked about very early on in the podcast. Those are all things that we do in the affair repair portion. And usually, let me say this, Morgan, typically you're going to start there in the triangle.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody has an affair, they get caught.
They need to repair it.
They got to repair it. And the one who's been betrayed feels pretty remorseful. Sometimes people don't feel remorseful. Sometimes people who cheat have their own set of trust issues with the marriage. So what they want to do is they want to focus more on the marriage side of the triangle. There's general marriage issues, how unhappy they were before. If you do that, you're going to have some friction, though. Mm-hmm. Because the one who's been betrayed, generally speaking, all of this is generally speaking, they've just been betrayed.
Right. They can't see any marriage issues.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's like, no way.
Yeah,
or they may.
Yeah, exactly. No way, you hurt me. Or they may even say, yeah, there's stuff there, but I can't do it yet.
Right.
I'm too broken.
Yeah.
I'm in too much pain. I can't do it yet. So you have a dynamic right there where one of you is wanting to work on the marriage, and then the other one is wanting to work on the affair.
The broken trust piece.
The broken trust piece. But you get into a power struggle.
Right.
And what happens when you want to work on the marriage, you may be saying, yeah, I still want to be here. But when you do that, you're not really showing what I would consider probably sufficient remorse, sufficient regret. You're saying, yeah, but...
Right. But you did.
Yeah.
Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, and it's almost like a form of scorekeeping in a way.
Right.
And the one who's been injured is like, I can't go back. I can't go work on that right now.
Yeah.
It's almost
an open wound. It's bleeding.
Yeah.
We have to stitch this up first, y'all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a tremendous pain. Mm-hmm. And there is a sense of and so sometimes, when people are betrayed, they have this sense of, you broke me, you fix me. Mm-hmm. You destroyed me, you fix me. I am wounded beyond repair, and I need you to show me that you're with me. Mm-hmm. I need you to be there by my side and help me get through this. I have questions. I need you to answer those questions. I need you to be transparent. I need you to stop working with this person if you're working with them. I need you to take these steps for me. And I get it. I've been wronged by people before, and it's like, you did this, you fix it.
Right.
Like, it's a very righteous type of anger that we feel.
Right.
You did this, you fix it.
Yeah, and you want to stick around. Well, you got to fix it. You
Yeah.
know, you gotta repair us.
Yeah, you did the crime, you do the time.
Yeah.
You know, the sense of justice. And we've all felt that in
Yeah.
different areas of life. And people who've been betrayed very much feel that. And so what can happen is we get into a power struggle with that. And so it's, generally speaking, I don't know the circumstances of your situation.
Yes. This
But-
is just for information.
Yeah, this is information purposes only. This, of course, isn't coaching, therapy, anything
Right.
like that. So generally, we're going to start with the affair repair portion of the triangle, you know, before we get into general marriage issues. When people will start with general marriage issues first is maybe an avoid couple where they don't know that, hey, we need to talk about this, we need to address it. Or it's a situation where the one who had the affair is maybe leaning out of the marriage.
Yeah.
They're like, I'm not so sure I want to stay. I haven't made up my mind I want to be here yet. And what that does is it causes the one who's been betrayed to put their needs on the back burner, put themselves on the back burner, because they still love their spouse. Maybe they've been together for quite a while. You know, maybe they have family. And it's reasonable to want to try to keep your family together. So the third thing that we have to address, and this is what people tend to neglect,
In the triangle?
In the triangle is they neglect trauma. And I have a couple that I worked with. I'll just briefly share some of their stories so that, you know, without revealing any identifying information. This was a couple where the husband had an affair, and this was absolutely heartbreaking to me. This is a really good couple, really good people. The husband has an affair, and by the time I meet them, they had been working at this for 3 years.
Oof. Yeah.
And they were in therapy 3 times a week. Once,
Wow.
yes.
For 3 years?
Yes.
3 for 3. Wow.
Yeah. So they were in marriage counseling once a week. They were in individual therapy, both individual therapy, not trauma therapy, for 3 years.
Wow.
And the husband eventually goes and does his own set of trauma therapy. He had a childhood that most people would agree, yes, that was bad. Like, go do trauma therapy. The wife was unusual for somebody who's in therapy. She had a good childhood. Really nothing to point to. Loved by her parents unconditionally. Like, really no issues. And so the therapist, there was no recommendation for her to go do trauma therapy. And so by the time I met them, she was ready to leave. They had heard the podcast early on in the process, or found out, they had found it. And then they had worked with various therapists. But what was neglected was the trauma piece. And so when I met them the first time, probably within, I say 5 minutes, probably wasn't that long, or that short of time. It was probably closer to 20 minutes in, half an hour in, it was very clear to me what was missing. This was somebody whose the husband had become engaged. He was a betrayer who was working very hard to become a healer, who was very engaged. And it was sad because she had lost feelings of love for him and attraction for him. And what had entered was disgust. And he was somebody who had made some mistakes in the healing process early on, but he had gotten very good at being a healer and being there for her. But because of the way these traumatic wounds work, is you're not just usually traumatized once in an affair. You're traumatized sometimes in the healing process. People do trickle truth. People don't always cut off the affair right away. Sometimes people still have to go to work with the affair partner. And so people can have a lot of wounds that occur. And what
Through the healing process.
Yeah, just even
not
through
just
the healing
the
process.
trauma, or not just the affair itself, but like through the healing process, mistakes are made.
And those usually end up hurting more because
Yeah.
now you know I'm hurting.
Right. And you're going to make these.
And you still do it
blunders.
anyway. And
Yeah.
you still turn your back on me anyway, or you still aren't there anyway.
Right.
And so something we were talking about before we started recording is the biggest mistake that somebody who broke trust makes is they get into this trickle truth process.
Right.
They're not honest, but the biggest mistake of the person who had their trust broken, who's traumatized, is they don't do trauma therapy and they really end up getting stuck. And so, back to the workshops you were talking about earlier, we have a support group for people who've left the workshop, who've completed it, and they continue their healing journey. And sometimes, I've heard people say in that group, my spouse is doing everything right. They're doing all this stuff right, but I still feel stuck. And the reason, in my opinion, is there needs to be trauma therapy there.
Right.
Which
is something you do.
I'll do trauma. I'll work with people. So if you want to do that with me, I'd be happy to do it. Contact our office, contact us online. I like that. Honestly, I like that more than the couples therapy part. It's actually funner.
You see like immediate results. Is that why?
Yeah. Well, and it's good. That's a good point, Morgan. So these 3 sides of the triangle, the affair repair portion, the marriage side, the trauma side, they interconnect, and the trauma part puts a lid on how successful we can be. Because if the trauma isn't addressed, it's going to keep people stuck in their negative cycle. You have triggers to trauma. And so those triggers aren't reminders. They're flashbacks. They're emotional flashbacks. You relive what happened. You have these trauma symptoms come out again. And so what can happen is people, through no fault of their own, they just don't know that they need to do this.
Right.
Or maybe they've heard us talk about it, but they don't realize how important it is. And so they're doing everything right, but they're missing an important part of the healing piece. And as a result, they're staying stuck. They're never completely free from the negative cycle. They're no longer feeling attracted towards their spouse. And what ends up emerging when you have unhealed trauma and it's a relationship wound that occurs, what ends up happening is you end up feeling disgust towards your spouse. You maybe don't start with that, but what ends up happening is you feel disgust around the actions. And so people who have affairs can do really terrible things while having an affair. They can have unprotected sex. They can, have an affair with people really close to the family. They can have affairs with, you name it, just horrible things happen. And so their behavior we're disgusted with their behavior. We may not be disgusted with them, but as we continue to heal, not heal, as we continue to try to work through this healing process but not heal, what ends up happening is that that disgust goes from the actions to my spouse, the person. And that's where John Gottman, who identified, I think with 94% accuracy, he calls it contempt, which is a synonym for disgust. People will divorce when contempt or disgust is present in a marriage.
Yeah, for their partner, not just for their actions.
Yeah.
The actions are one thing, but when you feel it towards the partner, that's where it's real problematic. But, what I love about the trauma piece is, when we deal with it, it heals the emotional wounds that are created, and it helps you start to feel more like yourself. Yeah. And I think that's huge. People just don't feel like themselves, and they can't really have those conversations about things without feeling all of the brokenness all at once. And so that's personally what I love about kind of handling those trauma symptoms is you can now feel like you can think clearer about things and have those difficult conversations.
That's a good point, Morgan, because when people heal from trauma, one of the benchmarks that somebody's healing from trauma is they don't feel affected by it the same way. There's different benchmarks, but one of my favorite benchmarks is people have new positive beliefs about themselves and the situation. And I had a client one time, I did trauma therapy with this person, and she said, and this is really a result of healing wounds and trauma, she said, this was her new positive belief. If he were to ever cheat on me again, I know I would be okay. Nobody thinks that before the trust is broken. Before, and nobody definitely thinks that after. But because she had worked through the trauma of it, she felt empowered. She felt like she was like Wonder Woman. She felt like she could stand on a mountain and move mountains. Mm-hmm. Like she felt like victorious, like I am an overcomer. And it really was very liberating for her. And so there's some myths around trauma therapy though.
Okay.
And there's myths around this whole healing process. One of those myths is that if I do trauma therapy, I'm going to forget about what happened.
Oh, yeah. No.
Like, you're not going to forget. Like, I have done trauma therapy for myself.
Yeah, me too.
Morgan's done it. And I'm a huge believer in it, even though I'm a marriage therapist. We are huge believers in this because we've personally benefited from it. I think my marriage today is as good as it is because we both have done trauma therapy.
Oh, yeah. Same here. It wouldn't be as good without my working on my own traumas.
Oh, yeah. Like, I did probably the bulk of mine, the major stuff, before we ever met. Mm-hmm. And before that, I had toxic shame and, childhood stuff that had happened. And then I remember when you did yours, that was helpful. But
Yes, it was. He's like, it was very helpful.
But we understood these relationship things.
Yeah.
But what trauma does is it makes intimacy hard.
Yeah.
Because you're afraid of somebody really knowing you and seeing you.
Mm-hmm.
And then sometimes trauma symptoms if they're not fully dealt with, they can become a part of your relationship. And
your personality.
Yeah, and your personality, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. But what can happen too is trauma symptoms look different over time. And so a lot of what people think of as PTSD and trauma symptoms are more the acute period of like the crisis period.
Night sweats, waking up with nightmares, things like that.
Yeah, anxiety, the paranoia. Some of that, the obsessiveness, the obsessive thoughts. So trauma symptoms look different over time. There are some trauma symptoms that show up in the healing process as well that make healing from an affair difficult. There's obsession about what happened, but then an inability to process information. So we get traumatized by what happened, but then I'm asking you a million questions about it, but I can't process it. It doesn't make any sense. And so I keep asking over and over, and then I wear out my spouse because I'm asking you a million questions.
Or the same question over and over even. Because I'm trying to process it and I can't seem to get everything I need.
Yeah, and part of that, maybe I'm stuck there because of the trickle truth. Mm-hmm. Maybe, you really lied a lot. Maybe you really hurt me through other ways, different ways throughout our marriage. But that's a trauma symptom. And people who've broken trust need to be honest. People, they need to do that. But that's a trauma symptom. And so we can't completely heal and we can't completely get where we need to. We can have a good marriage in some ways, but we're going to still get pulled back into the negative cycle because trauma symptoms bring us back. If I can't process this and work through this, I'm going to stay stuck in time. Mm-hmm. And then I'm going to start resenting you. We're just not going to move forward because we're going to stay stuck on our negative cycle. So I wanted to mention another myth. Another myth is, so that first one I mentioned is, if I heal from this, I'm going to forget what happened.
Right.
And it didn't work like that. Another myth, but this one's partially true though. So this one's a little bit more deadly because it's partially true. It's if you put in the work, you broke my trust and you put in the work, the myth is I'm going to feel better, which is true. That's attachment theory 101. If you treat me right and you treat me in a caring and loving way, I'm going to feel connected to you and feel better to you. That's true, but it's only a partial truth because this now has reached the realm of trauma. This is no longer a distressing event, quote unquote. It's now a traumatic event. And there's different types of trauma. It takes a lot for something to be considered traumatic. You have single episode trauma, which is the roadside bomb goes off once. You get a gun pulled on you once. You get something, like that happens. You get shot at in combat once. But then you have multiple episode trauma where it happens over and over and over again. I remember being a bank teller, and that particular summer in Tulsa, where I was working at a bank, we had 18 bank robberies in Tulsa.
Oh my gosh!
And the one I worked at was like two different highways were like connected, and I'm like, we're just gonna get robbed. I know it.
Did you get robbed?
No, we never did.
Wow.
I
would have heard this. I
would have told you about it, but I just knew it was gonna happen. So I came into work every day dreading it. That was distressing. That wasn't traumatic. I dreaded it, and so. That word trauma, I think, gets overused. But now, if I had gotten robbed, that would have been a single episode of big T trauma.
We were first responders to someone on a couple who died on the car.
We've done that a couple times.
On the side of the road.
Yeah.
That was distressing.
Yeah, that was distressing. But then, to be the one in the accident, that's going to be traumatic. Mm-hmm. So there's just, being a responder can be traumatic. But the point I'm trying to make is there's levels of trauma here. But once it reaches the realm of trauma, it takes a lot for something to be traumatic. But once it reaches a realm of trauma, I have to deal with that now. And you being loving and sweet and accountable and transparent isn't going to be enough to heal me. It's going to help our relationship get better because you are showing me that you care about me. So I am going to feel some relief and some sense of security because you're helping me. But a good relationship doesn't heal trauma because trauma's first biological. It happens in the body. My fight or flight system gets set off. It's a completely different system. And a good relationship helps me feel better, gives me somebody to talk to, gives me somebody to lean on, but it doesn't relieve the trauma completely. It doesn't heal the trauma completely. Mm-hmm. And so it's a different system that has to get addressed.
And so that's why people say, well, if they are going to leave their spouse or they leave their relationship and they find a better relationship, they still take some of these wounds with them because a good relationship doesn't heal everything.
No, it does not. I remember, I had my trust broken before we met, and then we met like 10 months later, and part of me still felt depressed. Happy I met you, loved you and everything, but part of me still felt depressed after that. Probably took a couple of years before I started feeling different, which is, kind of a grief process. There's trauma and there's grief, and early grief lasts like 2 years. And then you're kind of always having some degree of grief.
Yeah, I remember you didn't listen to music. I thought in the first few years of our marriage, I thought, he just doesn't listen to music. And your mom was like, that's not really the case. And so I thought I that was probably something that you were
I just
feeling?
quit listening. Yeah, it was a trauma trigger for a long time. Because I learned every other song was a sad love song.
Yeah,
Like
just avoid that.
Yeah, I just quit listening
Yeah.
to sad love songs, and that's because one was happy, the next one was sad. So I just quit listening to the radio. This was back before, all this streaming stuff we have today.
Right. The choice wasn't yours as much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I remember one of the early years of our practice, we had an affair recovery support group for people who've been betrayed. And people would talk about their feelings. And I remember thinking, oh, I feel that still. And by this point, it had been 7 years.
Oh, wow.
And I still feel kind of dead on the inside. I still feel this. I still feel that. And so I'm kind of slow. I didn't realize, this is trauma. This is PTSD. Even though I had done trauma therapy before, I kind of stumbled into trauma therapy. I was really fortunate that I stumbled into it. I didn't realize it at the time. And so, these things will linger. They'll stay with you. And it's really a shame because people put in the work. It's heartbreaking. I got to tell you, it's heartbreaking because people will put in the work and then they're still feeling stuck. And so what I'm telling you guys today, if you're listening to this, please keep an open mind with this, because this, I'm telling you, this is, in my opinion, Morgan, this is this missing ingredient.
The missing piece.
Yeah, if you're working on your marriage and you're working on the affair and you're still feeling stuck and you're still getting into negative cycles, you got to really do the trauma therapy. And a couple things I want to just say about this. Since COVID, I've really just seen people from our podcast, like just kind of coaching. When I would see clients in Tulsa only, but half of the time it was affairs, half of the time it was more general marriage type stuff. But when I just started seeing people exclusively from our podcast and working with them, I realized I was referring everybody to trauma therapy. And I had one exception to that. One person where I was like, maybe this person doesn't need it. And anytime you have an outlier, you're always kind of like, this is an outlier.
This is strange.
This is strange. Can I trust this? And that person, my one outlier, contacted me a year later and said, look, I need to do trauma therapy. I need to come back and do this. Because I did talk to him about it, but I just didn't push it. So everybody, I personally am of the opinion that anybody who's been betrayed needs to do trauma therapy. They really need it.
And that means contact us, reach out to us. We can help you with that. So you don't have to go searching everywhere for someone who does good trauma treatment.
Yeah.
You can just reach us on our website and book an appointment. So that's something just I want to be clear about, because sometimes people don't understand that that's the case. You can just go to the healingbrokentrust.com website and we can help you with that. Don't worry about trying to find someone who's good and does a good job, because we can help with that. You had 2 myths so far. And then do you have another myth?
Yeah. So you got the affair repair side of the triangle. You have the general marriage issues. You have the trauma. I would lead, if you want to get out of crisis the quickest. This is my vantage point as a therapist. People don't always agree with me on this. Sometimes the one who's been betrayed, who had their trust broken, is going to say, you were unfaithful. I know you have some childhood issues. You go do trauma therapy first. That may be true. Maybe they do. And I agree. They probably do need trauma therapy.
But it's kind of a longer route.
It is a much longer route. And they're not going to, and it's still that old myth of, if you treat me better, I'm going to feel better, which is true to an extent. But if you really want to get out of crisis, I would lead with the one who's been betrayed first. So here's another thing that people need to do. They need to do trauma therapy at the same time they're doing marriage counseling. And so it's going to take time.
Yes.
You're going to have 2 appointments a week for yourself, at least. Maybe your spouse is going to do a 3rd appointment. But you do need to do this in conjunction with marriage counseling. You do not need to sacrifice marriage counseling for this. You need to be doing this at the same time. So here's a rut that people get into. They get into a rut if you've gone through something like this and you're only doing marriage counseling. That is going to help to an extent, but it's not going to get you where you completely need to go. And then you're also going to stay stuck if you only do trauma therapy and you don't do marriage counseling. Because to heal, we have to address both systems. We have to address us and we have to address the trauma.
Right.
And so you're going to have to do both.
Yeah, so that would kind of be the 3rd myth, which would be, fixing one will fix it all. I think sometimes people say, if you fix yourself, then we'll get better. And that's partial truth, but it's not the full truth.
Yeah, and Morgan, since I've been explaining the Healing Broken Trust triangle to clients, sometimes people really buy into this. Sometimes people are like, meh. They don't really think they need it. They just think you got to get better. The people who are doing the trauma therapy are having crazy results. They're really putting this behind them. It doesn't take 2 years to heal from this. Like, they're really putting this behind them. They're really finding post-traumatic growth. They're really moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's really important to emphasize. Because I think sometimes people will say, gosh, 2 or 3 appointments a week. It seems like it could be forever that you'll need that. But the truth is it's not.
No, you don't need it forever. There's different types of trauma therapy, but usually 6 to 14 sessions somebody will need for trauma therapy after being betrayed. Mm-hmm. And so people can find relief right away, after one session, but they're going to probably need 6 to 14 sessions, even if they find help that first session.
Yeah, and something I find important for people to know is there are lots of different types of trauma treatment, right? And sometimes we'll respond really well to one and not to another. Yeah. And I think sometimes people get kind of disappointed or discouraged. They've tried trauma. They tried maybe one type of trauma treatment. But I mean, Brad, you know several types of trauma treatment because different people respond differently to different methods. So just be aware that if you've tried one type of trauma, that it's not the only treatment out there.
Yeah, and I'm trained in maybe 6 or 7 different models.
Yeah.
And I try to incorporate at least 3 into a session with a client because it doesn't always work.
Right.
And it's very discouraging if you try to work and do this and it doesn't help you. So I incorporate different ways of healing into this. I want to recommend everybody get a book called The Body Keeps the Score. And I want to read a quote to you guys. So page 13 in Body Keeps the Score, he says this, and this is very true. Trauma, whether it is a result of something done to you or something you yourself have done, almost always makes it difficult to engage in intimate relationships. So trauma, whether it's something done to you or something you've done to someone else, almost always makes it difficult to engage in intimate relationships. After you've experienced something so unspeakable, how do you learn to trust yourself or anyone else again? Or conversely, how can you surrender to an intimate relationship after you have been brutally violated? That's why that trauma piece is so important. And nobody else is really talking about how important trauma therapy is to a marriage counseling situation. Like, nobody's talking about this. So you're not going to find a lot of therapists who are encouraging their clients to do this. And this, if I had a crystal ball and you were to predict, what the future of marriage counseling is going to look like, it's going to look like what I'm describing right now, guys. Like, it's going to look like this because our understanding of trauma is much better than it was. And people like me are speaking up, talking about this. And there's a little bit of research on this, not a lot. I spoke with somebody about a year ago who had done some research on this and read their dissertation, read their research. There's not a lot on this. Mm-hmm. It's really only a handful of therapists talking about it. This is not mainstream. And so people will do marriage counseling in the past, but because there was an issue, maybe some other trauma or hurt that happened, it never got addressed completely. And what people are only addressing is the communication aspect of what's going on. And they're not dealing with any other hurts and that kind of thing. And so they're staying stuck. They're not really completely healing. And people who are doing this, following this triangle, working on the affair repair, the general marriage issues, and then the trauma, they are having amazing results. I'm getting the best results I've ever gotten when people follow this. Mm-hmm. And I've been doing this for quite a while. I've always believed in trauma. I've always recommended it. We've had past episodes about how important trauma therapy is. But if you follow that path, you will be set free. You will find the healing you need. And that's why I consider this to be one of the most important podcasts we've ever done.
Yeah, absolutely. It's exciting stuff. I'm excited to see all of this just come together for you guys and for all of you out there. Thank you for listening. If you would like to attend a workshop with us, you can learn more about that at healingbrokentrust.com. So it's important to know that the podcast and the workshops are completely different. They're not the same thing. So what we talk about here is extremely valuable, but the workshop takes it to an even deeper level. It's really important as well. So it's not the same as, the masterclass or the podcast. It's its own thing where we work with you in a small group to work through these issues. And so there's that. So definitely check it out. Also, you can work with Brad or a member of our team as well, one-on-one. If you go to healingbrokentrust.com, you can find more information about how you can do that. And we love you guys, and we want to see you succeed and thrive and heal.
Yes.
And heal broken trust.
Yeah, my my life would be radically different if my parents knew this information that we're talking about right now.
Yeah, same here.
You know, like my parents went to marriage counseling 3 different times, and the field of marriage counseling is very radically better, radically improved upon what it was in the early 80s, and there was no concept of trauma therapy back then. Like, if they had known this, and I had a happy childhood, and I would never have had a need to become a marriage therapist, I wouldn't be here. Like, I'm telling you what I wish my parents had known, so that you and your children can have a happy life.
So yeah, it's just it's a passion project. We love you and we love it, and we just want to make sure that nobody has to deal with this pain any longer than they really have to. So definitely check us out, healingbrokentrust.com. Thanks, guys. Are you tired of learning how to heal from an affair, but not actually healing? Maybe you've gone to marriage counseling, but it hasn't gotten you anywhere. Or you've spent months struggling to heal and you're tired. If you're worried you might never be able to get through this on your own, then consider letting us help you. Go to healingbrokentrust.com and discover how working with Brad or a member of our team can make the difference you're craving. That's healingbrokentrust.com. And remember, as always, this podcast is for information purposes only. It is not to be construed as therapeutic advice and is not counseling. It's just for education purposes only.